I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome back. Today, we will be discussing longevity and this idea, this dream of living forever, which has been around since as long as we've been human. Jennifer is going to fill us in on some of the history and I guess the legends. I'm very excited. I feel like I vaguely know that the Holy Grail is about living forever, but I don't know any of the details. So I'm excited to hear what you found. And then for me, I focused on modern day longevity research, and I guess I would call them like celebrities in this space. And they're very interesting stories. My interest in this topic started because I was watching The Kardashians. I love that show. And last season, they did an episode where Kim, Khloe, and Chris actually did this test where they got results on their biological age versus their chronological age. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah, I have actually. Do you know what Inside Tracker is?
No.
They advertise a lot on like Huberman and those health podcasts,
okay.
but it's basically
So of course you would know.
Yeah. I think they do like blood tests and hormone tests and stuff and then tell you what your biological age is and essentially track your insides in the same way that you would track your outsides, hence Inside Tracker. But I knew someone who did it and they were very proud that they were like 29 when really they were 33.
Yeah, so the way it works, at least the test the Kardashians did, is they squeezed like a pinprick of blood from their finger, which when I was watching this, I was like, wow, Elizabeth Holmes vibes right here. Send it into this company. The company they used is called True Diagnostic. And then on the show, the CEO walked them through their results. And Kim, who is 44, had a biological age of 34. And Khloe had a biological age of 28, even though she's 40.
What? That's wild.
They always get claims that, they're on Ozempic or whatever. And so I think they use this as an opportunity to be like, no, I actually eat healthy. Like I actually work out. That's why I look the way I do. And also, here's the proof from my insides.
Honestly, if I had $1 billion, I would probably be very biologically young also. I think all the stress melting away would do something for my insides.
Yeah, and this has always been a hobby of the wealthy and the rich, right? I've heard it in a lot of tech circles in particular. That's why I was kind of surprised when the Kardashians were doing it, because I guess I think of them as more mainstream, although obviously they're incredibly wealthy and so they can fuck around with this kind of shit and it means nothing to them. This test is $500, so it's not cheap.
Right.
And so I wanted to do this episode because I feel like I'm starting to hear about this longevity research, biohacking, and people doing full body scans just from all corners, not just isolated to tech anymore. And I wanted to kind of understand the reasons why we as humans are so obsessed with living forever and what does that actually look like now that science has advanced so much? Are we actually any closer to this grand desire of being able to live forever?
I would be surprised if the answer is yes. I know who's the one, I'm sure you're going to talk about him, but the main guy who's spearheading
Bryan Johnson.
Bryan Johnson, yeah. What was his company that he founded? How he got rich?
Braintree, a payments company.
I always associated it with PayPal. I was is he one of the Venmo or PayPal guys? But
yeah, so his company acquired Venmo.
It always just reminds me of, you said, the tech bros, but they're just so obsessed with optimizing everything that it's of course, now we're going to optimize how long we live. But this quest for immortality has been a rich person's game since the beginning of time. So what was interesting to me when I was looking at the history and of course, how long we've been interested in this, but the ways that immortality has evolved over time is that the definition of immortality has even evolved over time. Right now, in today's day and age, when we think of optimizing our biological age or living forever, we take Bryan Johnson seriously at his word that he's literally trying to live forever. Back in ancient times, this wasn't necessarily the goal. Your Earth years weren't necessarily the goal. We had this idea of immortality also in a spiritual sense. So immortality could be yes, you have your Earth life and you want to extend that as long as possible. But then your spirit goes on to live forever and we're going to have to prep you, hence mummification, hence all the things that were done in ancient Egypt and ancient China actually as well. So those two goals coincided a lot in the ancient world. We get in like the Middle Ages and more in like the 14th, 15th century, this switch to this fountain of youth idea where people aren't so concerned with living forever as they are being young. And
Mm.
you don't just want to be old and live forever, you want to look youthful. And then we get these weird beauty practices and lots of like potions that I'll get into. There's also this idea of living forever, as in living to age 120. Like
Oh,
that
like
would,
specifically that number.
it came up a lot because it comes up a lot in the Bible that
Ah, okay.
these biblical figures are living to like 160, 180, 120. And so they thought that living to these biblical numbers was quote unquote living forever or like really extending your
Mm.
lifetime to something astronomical. As time goes on, it definitely changes. And I feel like in the modern era, you'll tell us more about this later, but like it is more literally on your earth years living forever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone thinks literally forever, like thousands of years, but people are
But that's
talking
the
about
goal.
like, yeah, people are talking about like, how can I live like a significant amount of time, like 50 years, 100 years longer? I didn't find anyone saying like, in our lifetime, like, we're going to be able to live till 200, but the conversation is centered around, yes, actually getting to 120, 130, 140. And then also, when you are 80, how do you feel like you're 50? How do you just like biologically have a healthier, younger body, even if chronologically you're 80 or 100?
So maybe our definitions haven't changed so much after all, because this is exactly what people were trying to do in Renaissance times with alchemy, especially, which is interesting.
Hmm.
So I'll give us a very concrete example of what people would do back in the day to try to maintain their youth and quote unquote live forever. So in 16th century France, they adopted a practice from ancient China and ancient Egypt of drinking gold, popularized by the rise of alchemy during the Renaissance period. In alchemy, the primary goal is immortality, and they use gold a lot because gold is considered incorruptible and it's considered the purest of all metals. So, the theory here is that if you consume small quantities of gold, it's a substance that's immortal. So, therefore, you will become immortal. It seems like
Mm.
odd logic to me. I don't know. Apparently, these people were very smart. I mean, they gave us science after all, but this this didn't check out to me as very scientific. So,
I mean, I'm definitely getting Mistborn vibes. I know you're reading Brandon Sanderson too, but
oh my
this
gosh,
is
I would
exactly
be
that theory.
if you are a listener that gets that reference, bravo, bravo. I'll be shocked if we have like 10 listeners that gets the Miss Ford reference. All right, so Diane de Poitiers, who was the mistress of King Henry II of France, she was very in on this theory. She drank lots and lots of gold. She ended up dying at the age of 66, so unfortunately did not work for her.
At that time, like 66, to me, it sounds like it's pretty old for that time because I imagine the lifespan of most folks was like in their 30s. Maybe that's wrong.
I feel like that's a common misconception about
Mm.
like older periods is the average lifespan was really short because people would die like more frequently of accidents, and if you got
Hmm.
sick you would die very early. But if you were kind of like more on the wealthy side and you're not like out hunting and going to war like you are with these women, and like you're not dying in childbirth, you can live to be like in your 70s 80s, and that isn't
Got it.
unheard of by any means. Yeah, so 66 is decent, but certainly not
Hmm.
I'm drinking gold to live
Immortal.
forever kind of age. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So when they excavated her body, she had more than 500 times the normal level of gold in her body, which I thought was interesting, not just because that's a ton, but there's even like a standard amount of gold in your body, which I'm like, how does that, how do you have 500 times more? Should it be just like zero? But regardless, that did not work for her nor anybody else. And it sounds like very expensive hobby, drinking gold. Outside of these potions and like drinking gold and such, one of the first people to try to actually get a very set scientific elixir or potion for immortality was, apologies in advance, I'm going to butcher this name. Lucy, maybe you can help me because it's a Chinese name. Uh,
Oh, God.
Qin Shi Huang. The first name is Qin.
Ching, ching.
Qin. Okay.
It's like more like a
Qin
CH. Yeah.
Qin Shi Huang, who was the first
Hmm.
emperor of unified China. He started the Great Wall, made the Terracotta Warriors, very, very famous figure in history. So he was absolutely obsessed with finding an elixir for immortality. He went around all of the provinces and asked wizards and holy people to find him this potion. And he was pretty brutal about it. Like he would kill sorcerers, bury them alive, and say, well, if they're real, they'll just come back up and be alive anyway. And that's how I know that their elixir worked. So we're getting like witch hunt vibes with this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, but he was one of those ones that didn't believe that his Earth years were the end of his life, which is why he built
Mm.
the terracotta soldiers, of course. He thought he was going
Mhm.
to bring his army with him into the afterlife, very similar to the ancient Egyptians here. But poor Qi Shi Huang, was that good? I tried.
Yeah, good
I
job.
tried. He died at 49 in 210 BC. Ironically, he died with very heightened levels of mercury in his system. So his
Mm.
quest for immortality probably killed him. He was drinking these potions that most likely had high levels of mercury,
Mhm.
died at 49. So, more often than not, these had the exact opposite effect of what they were trying to do. But when we get more into like the mythology of immortality, the first thing that comes to mind is the Fountain of Youth. Like, this was actually something that you
Mhm.
put in our docs. You were like, what's up with the Fountain of Youth? And I, for all of my love of mythology and folklore, I actually did not know much about the Fountain of Youth outside of like just like
Hmm.
your normal, oh, it exists, right? In mythology. The Fountain of Youth first came into literature in the 5th century BC by a philosopher, Herodotus. Again, I'm just like butchering all of these
Herodotus?
names. I don't know how to say Herodotus. Yeah, thank you. Herodotus in the 5th century BC, Greece. He described a fountain that when you bathe in it or drink, you would become youthful and live to be like biblical years kind of old, not like forever, forever. There are other traditions out there, like in the Caribbean and in the Eastern world, that have this exact same story. So this is not unique to the Western world, which is kind of interesting.
Hmm.
It kind of went underground. Like people stopped really searching for it, with the exception of the Holy Grail, which we'll get to. That was popular in like 11th and 12th centuries. But this idea specifically of the Fountain of Youth became popular again in the 16th century during the Age of Exploration. We have Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon, who ended up being the first governor of Puerto Rico. He, in Puerto Rico, was speaking to the native islanders of the Caribbean, and they told him about an island off of the coast of Florida that sounded very much like the Fountain of Youth. The way that the islanders were describing it is it's this lush, gorgeous, beautiful land that will heal you, make you prosperous. And with his Western mentality, he was like, oh, I think they're talking about the Fountain of Youth. They were probably just talking about a really beautiful island, but regardless, this island was Bimini, and it's an island between Florida and the Bahamas. So, in his search for the island, he hits the coast of Florida, lands the Spanish in Florida for the first time. They hit St. Augustine and claim to have found the Fountain of Youth there. Funnily enough, in St. Augustine, they still really embrace this tradition. They have the Fountain of Youth Park where you can go and like drink water from a natural spring with minerals. Everything is Fountain of Youth branded. The waters in St. Augustine and Bimini, they naturally have a lot more magnesium in it, just by the way that the tides go in and kind of sit in these wells. They have more magnesium and other trace minerals. So it actually is really good for you. And like magnesium is something that's really good for your longevity. So there's some talk about whether or not that's where the rumors originate from.
I guess I always thought of it as like a liquid you drink, but it's interesting to think about it, as you're saying, as something you bathe in. Because I feel like even in Europe, didn't the wealthy go to the baths when they were sick or like go and get fresh air away from the cities to
Hmm.
recover? So
Yep.
it's interesting, like, obviously being in nature does improve your mood, can improve your health. There are these external factors where it feels like people were not that far off. Like they were kind of right. They just took it obviously to an extreme that is not true.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Like, as soon as you said bathing is good for you, it made me think of Epsom salt baths, which is basically a magnesium
Hmm.
soak.
Oh, I didn't know that. That
Yeah.
makes sense now. I was always wondering why having salty water would help you, but okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, it's for the minerals. So I bet you're just getting basically an Epsom salt bath by like going into the Fountain of Youth.
I guess like in movies, I think I'm thinking Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or maybe I'm thinking like
Mhm.
National Treasure, but I thought the Holy Grail and the Fountain of Youth were somehow the same. They were linked. Like if you drank water from the Holy Grail, that was equivalent to the Fountain of Youth. But I don't know if that's just a misunderstanding or if like movies depict it that way.
You're exactly right. So the Holy Grail first arrives on the scene from the Arthurian legend cycle. It was a stone or a goblet that, if you drink from it, you have eternal youth, vitality. So, yeah, essentially the same thing as the Fountain of Youth. During the Crusades, and as the evolution of the Arthurian legend cycle developed in conjunction with Christianity, the Holy Grail became the chalice from which Jesus and the disciples drank at the Last Supper. And then there was also this idea that it was potentially the goblet where they caught Jesus's blood during the crucifixion. So
Mm.
during the Crusades, there is a legend that the Knights Templar, they found the Holy Grail in Jerusalem and were guarding it. And it was part of a power struggle between the papacy and the Templars, which ultimately led to all the Templars being executed in, I think, 1325.
Mm,
That is completely unsubstantiated. It is legend, but that is the history of the Holy
yeah.
Grail. It does somewhat coincide. I would consider it one of these offshoots of the idea of the Fountain of Youth. Like
Hmm.
I said, many cultures have this idea of Fountain of Youth and like different flavors. So it just seems like the Anglo-Saxon Christian version of this
Yeah.
legend.
Okay, so like we're in like Da Vinci Code territory, more with the Holy Grail.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that was fascinating. I guess it's always this thing that we just know growing up, but I think the details, like especially with the potions, did not know that. That's so interesting. I knew the makeup thing, which is that, women would try to make themselves look beautiful, like Queen Elizabeth the First was putting like lead-based paint on her face, and then that
Yep.
made her die sooner. But it's fascinating that people were actually ingesting metals. That's wild to me.
Yeah, I stumbled across this tidbit, which was really interesting. One of the popes, sometime in the 1400s, he had a stroke, and they thought that they could give him a blood transfusion with somebody who was younger to make him survive and live longer.
Mm. Hmm.
And so it was actually the first blood transfusion in recorded history. They both died, both the donor and the pope died, unfortunately.
Wow.
Um, but the reason that that was interesting was it started this exploration of blood transfusions, but also like, can we make people live longer by donating younger blood? And there's, I think, just such a rich history of kind of scientific exploration and research just by like these crazy pursuits. In the beauty industry, something that they used to do in like the 1800s is put blood of like teenagers as a facial. And if you think about it
Mm.
now, speaking of the Kardashians, they do those vampire facials, plasma
Hmm.
facials, and it's kind of the exact same thing. Like you're putting youthful blood on your face. So we
Yeah.
do have a way of evolving out of these like seemingly crazy ideas from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you bring that up because perfect transition, this blood boys concept. Have you heard of that term? It's like these old rich people taking a younger person's blood. That's how I heard of Brian Johnson at first because he does this.
Yeah, hilariously, because you know me and a conspiracy theory and secret societies love it. That was always one of the conspiracies is that the rich are taking these young teenage people and like yes, there's like a pedophile angle, but also they're doing it to like zap their youth from them in blood. And then when it
Mhm.
became like something that was being recorded and being done, I was like, holy shit, they're
Yep.
just coming right out with it.
Yeah, it's fascinating that you said this Pope did it like way back in the 15th century. Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is perfect. We can kind of get into Brian Johnson, who is a very, very fascinating character. There is a documentary about him on Netflix that I just watched. So I know a lot about this guy's life now. Brian Johnson is a 47-year-old millionaire tech guy. Like I said, I first heard of him in like summer of 2023 because he made the news for taking blood plasma transfusions from his son. And there were all these articles out calling him a vampire, talking about this blood boys gossip, that there's like a lot of billionaires doing this secretly. But he was out here like out in the open.
Is this like a conspiracy or is this real?
It's real. I mean, well, Brian Johnson does it. I think it's
Right.
a little conspiracy in terms of who else.
Yeah. I got to share my little conspiracy theory with this. So, you know, when people get obscenely rich and famous, they start to look very weird. I think Mark Zuckerberg is a perfect example of this. And honestly, Elon Musk too. They
Yeah.
look so differently than they did when they were on their up and up. I seriously believe it's this blood thing. Like, I think they're getting their blood transfusions. I think something is like fucking with their face in this way. Like, it looks internal. That's the thing. It's not like plastic surgery, it's not plugs. You can see right through that. I'm like, there's something in the depths of your soul that looks different. And I swear
Mm.
it's this blood transfusion stuff.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
Or it's them just becoming evil over time, is what's happening in the depth of their
That
soul.
too. That too.
So that's the extent of what I knew about Brian until I watched this documentary. And I'm going to take you through a journey because I'm assuming you don't know much about him.
Mm-mm.
Brian Johnson, he has a team of more than 30 doctors and health experts monitoring his every bodily function. To give you a sense of his lifestyle, he takes 80 pills a day, works out an hour every day, has a very regimented vegan diet, and does red light therapy, audio therapy, all of the therapies for his whole body. He goes to bed at 8:30 p.m. every night and gets 8 hours and 34 minutes of sleep exactly. And he spends about $2 million a year on all of this. literally has a medical grade facility in his house to take his blood and do all of these tests on him throughout the day.
Wow.
So that's the kind of life he's living.
That's not a life at all.
Yeah, when he started to blow up, a lot of critics were saying that. And yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to live that kind of life. It seems like very lonely. And the documentary goes into how like he basically can't have friends or relationships or can't really date because he's just on such a strict schedule and no one can really relate to him.
Wow.
Yeah, with the exception of his son, who we'll get into, but is obviously giving him blood. The scientific theory behind what Bryan Johnson is doing is called this longevity 1-2-3 model, which was developed by Dr. Oliver Zolman, who is Bryan Johnson's longevity consultant. Level 1, you can think of it as just like the basic stuff: eat healthy, sleep well. As you move up the levels, it gets more complicated. And level 3 is based on listening to your organs. So each organ needs something different, and your body tells you what it needs, and you shouldn't trust your mind because your mind is inundated with ads, social media, so many modern day addictions, and you just won't be able to control yourself. That's the philosophy behind everything that Bryan Johnson does, which is why he gets the tests done throughout the day so he can understand what his liver is telling him he needs and what his heart is telling him he needs. And like when he goes to the grocery store, he's like, what would my liver want to eat? Not what I want to eat. Espousing this kind of philosophical change where most people, we prioritize what our brain wants. We listen to our brains. And he's saying, no, that's the wrong thing to do. Your brain is being tricked by all this external stimulus. You need to listen to your internal organs, listen to your body.
Interesting. I mean, I don't disagree, but you can't listen to your organs unless you have a medical grade facility in your home.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think his origin story is really interesting and kind of explains why he's evolved to think in this way. Just really quick before I get into that, like, what are the results, right? He's doing all this stuff and he put all of his biological data online on his website. So anybody can look at it. And his results are that he's reduced his biological age by about 5 years. And his new pace of aging is 0.69, which means that for every 12 months he actually lives, he ages 8 months.
Sorry, I'm literally cracking up right now if you're not looking at the video. That's it? That's it? What?
Okay, that was my reaction too. Because in the documentary, he's like, it's so impressive. Like, look what I've done. But I was like, okay,
no.
5 years?
$10 million? You said $2 million a year, right?
Yeah, I guess he's been doing it since like 2022.
Okay, let's call it 3 years. So $6 million. Wait, so in 3 years, he's shaved off 5? I am not about it. That's wild.
And here's where his origin story comes in. So, okay, we already mentioned like why he's wealthy. He founded a tech company. While he was doing his tech company, he was living that typical, really intense work lifestyle. Like he was exhausted, always stressed. He was also married and had 3 kids. So he just like wasn't eating well, wasn't sleeping well. He also grew up Mormon, and around the same time that he was building his company, he started struggling with his religion. He became depressed and actually started having suicidal ideation. And that's what revealed to him that his mind was not a clear source of judgment, is when he started having these really depressive suicidal thoughts. Fast forward a bit, he ends up totally changing his life. He sells his company, he leaves the church, and he gets a divorce, and he starts working on Blueprint, which is the name of this project where he's using this like level 1-2-3 protocol. So that's his like new company, it's his new mission, that's what he's spending all his time on now. Basically, like prior to him starting Project Blueprint, he did not live a healthy lifestyle. I mean, they showed footage of this on the documentary. It's not like he was visually like very obviously unhealthy. He just looked like an average American, but he is kind of saying that he's making up for all this debt because he never took care of his body before, like never exercised, none of that. So I think that's why for him, like he thinks it's kind of impressive. He now looks like, if you look at a photo of him, he looks very ripped, like he has very low body fat percentage. But obviously that's because he's barely eating and he's working out all the time.
Yeah, he looks like an alien. He looks like one of the alien people that I was talking about with my conspiracy theory. Like he looks bizarre.
Yeah. And so it's interesting the reception he's gotten, because when he first started Project Blueprint, which I think was like in 2021 or 2022, they were kind of, he and his like CMO, they were just kind of speaking into the void. Like no one was really interested. And it wasn't until he started publishing his results online that they got some momentum. Like a journalist reached out, wrote an article about him, and then that went viral. Basically the very next day, because on his website, he publishes his whole regimen, including Amazon affiliate links to all the products he uses. And I guess like everything was sold out.
Wow.
There was like a lot of interest from people. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, maybe these folks were already interested or because of his fame, they kind of jumped on the bandwagon. But it has now become like very much a thing where a lot of people are like following his regimen. And his slogan for Project Blueprint is "Don't Die." And there's all these like hikes that are organized and group dances and just like friendship being built around his brand in all of these different areas of the world.
Wait, okay, so can we go back and explain a little bit like what so he has this crisis of faith and
Mhm.
he's lost meaning in life and he wants to commit suicide. So then he does the opposite.
Yeah. It's not clear to me how he managed to get himself out of the depression. Like that was glossed over in the documentary. It sounds like a big part of it was like making the decision to leave the church, which I mean, I don't know a ton about this, but I've heard other stories of folks who were Mormon and then left. And that's like a very difficult process. Like he ended up losing touch with his family because they couldn't
Mm.
accept that he left the church, with the exception of his oldest son, Talmage, who is the one donating blood to him and is in the documentary. But the rest of his family, like, do not speak to him, basically.
Wow, that's really sad.
Yeah, so like one might argue that because he left his religion, he was looking for a new one and he decided to devote himself to health, right? And like he's taken it to this
Yeah.
like really extreme, almost religious level.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like I mean, not to rag on this guy, but it does very much seem like unhealthy mental state to be in to devote that much of your life to this. Yeah, it struck me as like something was not quite right, and I think we got validated that something's not quite right. But you know, I mean, if it keeps him going, it keeps him going.
The stuff that I've covered so far, like you might think it's not quite reasonable, but it's like all around eating well and sleeping and things that we know we're supposed to do, but obviously we don't because it's hard to do it. And it takes money and privilege to be able to do those things. But he also does these much more experimental treatments as well. And this is where it gets kind of wild. So he has taken human growth hormone before. He did it for like 10 months, started having side effects and stopped. He is on an immune suppressing drug regimen, which, I mean, obviously the downside of that is that you literally get bacterial infections, and he's taking like 13 of those pills a day. He's also doing this blood plasma transfusion with his dad and his son. And I want to go into this a little bit because I was curious, like, what does this actually mean? So, this started because his dad, who is now in his 70s, was just starting to notice that his memory was degrading and having concerns around aging. Bryan offered, "Oh, like, I can give you some of my blood plasma if you'd like," because there was a study done in mice where they connected a young mouse and an old mouse by their veins and arteries. So, like, this is graphic, but they literally sewed the mice together and they
Oh my
stayed sewed
god.
together. And then the
Oh.
young blood was circulating through the old mouse, and they found that the old mouse's organs actually reduced in age. So that's the theory
Oh.
here, is like that's the proof is from mice. It obviously has not been done in humans. And so their way of replicating this in humans is that they, take blood and then give it to the next person. And so Bryan offered to do it for his dad. And then he was like, let's just make this a family affair. And he asked his son, "Are you in?" And his son was like, "Yeah, I'm in."
Oh my god.
Yeah. So
Wait,
they
why
took,
wouldn't he give his son's plasma to the dad?
I don't know. Maybe it's all being shared. I don't know the details. But like literally in the documentary, they treat it like a road trip. They're like, this is a family bonding activity. And they go to this clinic and they get this done. And they're all talking about how it brought them so much closer emotionally, is like the real benefit.
Oh.
So he is kind of getting like more radical. There's this, but he also even tries gene therapy, which he has to go to Honduras for because you cannot do it legally in the US. Like it's only approved to do in clinical trials for various serious health conditions. And he does it just to like try to improve his longevity, where literally he gets DNA injected into him because, again, based on mice studies, there was like a 30% increase in the lifespan of mice who had this done to them. And obviously, if you're getting like DNA injected in you, you're risking like cancer, you're risking a lot. And he does that.
I
Like,
I'm calling it now. Our next pandemic is going to originate in the body of Bryan Johnson. Like this is we're going to have some like mutant fucking strain that he can't fight off because he has immunosuppressants. This is the new wet market. That's wild. Oh my god.
oh my God, that's so funny. You're so right. That's hilarious. Yeah, he's an interesting dude. They interviewed some scientists in this documentary and they were like, obviously, this is not scientifically proven. All we know right now is that we can extend the lifespan of mice, but that does not apply to humans. And what Bryan is doing is like N of one. It's not science. Like it's just, I guess the skeptical way to look at it is like he's also making a lot of money because there's so much attention on him now. Not only like is he basically an influencer and doing all of that and getting affiliate links, but Project Blueprint now has its own olive oil and you can buy it and it's $46 a bottle. Definitely questionable whether he like is becoming a snake oil salesman.
Well, I've heard something recently. I don't know if this is launched yet, but is he teasing having a subscription service?
Probably. I'm not surprised. I feel like this is getting into AG1 territory and all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think I've definitely heard he wants to do something where you like subscribe to get the supplements every month and then like inside information on all the research. And I think even like subscriptions to like the tests where they can like send them to your home. So you're like getting tested, all that stuff. So yeah. Very much AG1 snake oil salesman type thing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I actually know somebody who has his stuff in New York.
Did they notice a difference?
They used to live in San Francisco, right? So they are a tech bro. Like he literally got a full body scan, did all these tests, like to tell him his age, and he wants to live forever. I don't think it's just Bryan Johnson he's being influenced by, but as we go into the next person, this is becoming more and more of a thing. And my friend does happen to be male, but he's young, he's 30, and he's very interested in this. And then the next person I did research on, she's young, she's 30. And she's very interested in this as well. So to me, I'm like surprised that there's like folks who are just as passionate as Bryan Johnson, but it's not directly affecting their lives yet. Like they're very much seeing it as like a preventative thing that they need to start focusing on now rather than Bryan Johnson. I mean, he's trying to like make up for lost time.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next person I looked at, her name is Laura Deming. I came across her just as I was doing research, and she's really interesting because she was a former child prodigy. She joined like a research lab at UCSF at 12 and enrolled at MIT at 14.
Okay, so she's like a science prodigy?
Yeah, she's a science genius. She founded this venture capitalist fund called the Longevity Fund, which is focused on aging and life extension. She believes that science can be used to create biological immortality in humans. I listened to a podcast with her because I wanted to understand, like, okay, these people who really believe in this work and they're like on the cutting edge, what is it that they believe? Practically, like, how many years are they talking? Can we extend our life? And I thought a lot of her responses were really interesting. So the podcast host asked her, is ending aging even possible? And her response was, well, there's no physical reason why it should be impossible. We are just a collection of atoms, and the question is just, can we keep that configuration of atoms in a way that resembles health? It might be hard, but there's no like reason why it's physically impossible. So then the question is, well, how hard is it? And her perspective is, okay, back in the 70s, back in the 80s, it would have been really hard. There was nothing making anything alive live longer. However, that is not true today. Because of these studies in mice, there have been actually a lot of mice studies. She has a list of 95 on her website where humans have been able to make mice live longer. She references another study where in the 1990s, researchers zapped a bunch of worms with rays that mutated them randomly. And some of those mutants actually lived about twofold longer because of a changed gene. And if you change that same gene in a mouse, the mouse also lives longer. So she's basically saying we're kind of at a very interesting time to be alive because, yes, although like nothing has been proven in humans, we've obviously not done human trials for any of this. We are able to manipulate lifespans in other creatures. And her perspective is like it's only a matter of time before there are actual practical things that we could do to live longer too.
Interesting.
The podcast host was like, obviously, we're all alive right now. Like, are we going to be able to live till 200? What does that mean for us? And she was saying, no. It's more about how do we give people who are like 50 or older more agency over their health and well-being and essentially level the playing field with a younger person, like give these people a second act. We should expect that in our lifetimes so that when we're 50, we don't have to succumb to the inevitable decline that faces all humans, right? And there are going to be solutions. So that's the goal. And like that argument is what I would say, like a lot of supporters of what Bryan Johnson is doing would say is like, someone's got to do it. He's the guinea pig and he's trying all this really crazy stuff. But like ultimately that's going to trickle down and help us. The average person is not going to take 80 pills a day, but he is. And his goal is like eventually to come up with some a more practical tool, a more practical answer to aging for the average human that can be achievable.
That sounds more reasonable to me, I think. I always thought the idea of living forever or even like extremely long sounds very scary, quite frankly.
Hmm.
But also the idea of aging and living these really low quality of life years for a third of your life, potentially from 70 to 100 or 75 to 90, however long. Like, that's a really long period of time to like potentially be bedbound or like be riddled with, I don't know, like COPD or any really common thing that happens to you in those upper elderly ages. So the idea of giving somebody a second act or prolonging quality of life, like that sounds really, really worthwhile. And I can get
Hmm.
behind that for sure.
After looking into this and looking at how these people are living their lives, I was definitely left with the question of like, of course, when you talk about it in these extremes, it feels kind of crazy, very fringe. But like, obviously, everyone has been telling us don't smoke, don't drink. These things impact your longevity. And if you want to like be healthier as you're older, you do have to take care of yourself. We all know that, but we're not willing to do it. And so for me, I was like, what is actually worth changing my lifestyle for? There are other people in Bryan Johnson's life that are more reasonable. One could empathize with them more. And like, I found his dad a person I really empathized with because his dad is now 70. He's feeling the effects of his age every single day. And the documentary producer asked him, like, are you worried about some of the things that Bryan does? And he was like, yes, I'm really worried. I'm a reasonable person. There's a ledge and I stop. I don't jump off, whereas Bryan is taking it to the extreme. And it's interesting because by the end, the documentary ends and they're like, where is everyone now? Kind of vibe. And his dad even did the same gene editing therapy that Bryan did, which I
Oh,
thought was
wow.
really interesting because he was saying that was like really dangerous. He was worried about Bryan and then he did it himself. So I don't know. I guess I just was like, wow, you did drink the Kool-Aid eventually, but you're at a point in your life where I mean, I don't know. I was having a conversation the other day and one of my friends was like, I Googled what it's like being 70 and the result was like really depressing.
I almost like don't even want to hear it. It'll send me in a spiral. I shit you not. I cannot think about getting old or dying. It will throw me into a depression. I can't.
Yeah. My personal philosophy has always been I honestly just don't want to live that long. If I cannot be healthy, I would rather just pass away at 70. Like, I don't need to live till I'm 80. I don't need to live till I'm 90. I want to live with my mental acuities intact and a generally healthy body. And if I can't have that, like, I'm fine. I don't need 100 years on this earth. Life is good. It's okay that it's short. I think it makes you cherish every moment more. Avery's never understood that. I'm always like, I hope I go first. Just let me die. 70's old enough,
Oh my God. Well, I guess it depends on what grandkids and kids and like
Yeah.
family that you want to be around for. But you don't want kids, so maybe you are good. Like, just,
I know. Why am I even around? Do I even need to exist?
you'll be like, I'm on my fifth dog. We're good. I think.
What are your thoughts? Like, what would be worth changing your lifestyle for?
Yeah, I think about this a lot with health because as I get older, I definitely change. So I'm sure my answer is going to be different even in like 2 to 5 years than it is today. I used to be, especially in my like early 20s, very much like, no, fuck it. I'm only young once, do whatever I want. And I definitely don't feel that way now. And I think it's because as you get older, you start to feel the immediate effects of like drinking too much or even having like a bad takeout food meal. You feel it immediately. And it
Yeah.
kind of makes you be like, well, what am I doing to my body? So I've definitely cleaned up my life a ton. I'm even considering not drinking anymore, honestly, because it just affects even my mental health so much. So I've cooled off a lot, but I do kind of have this philosophical aversion to the Bryan Johnson way of living because I don't think it's a life. Like, if you are just living to be healthy, if every
Mhm.
decision you make is around, is this healthy or is this not? You aren't being present and you're not actually living. And what's the point of prolonging your life? You're prolonging your life just so you can pursue prolonging your life. It's circular. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
I always admire these blue zone centenarians who are like, for a second I was like, did I just accidentally say centaur? But no, I did not. I said centaur. But these people who are 100 and interviewers ask them like, what made you live so long? What healthy things do you do? And they're like, I'm happy. I laugh all the time. I drink whiskey. I have a cigarette after dinner. And they're just happy. So I think there's something to be said for that too, quite frankly. So TLDR, I think the important thing is to make decisions that feel good for you even now. Like, I don't think I would pause my life in any shape or form in the pursuit of living longer at all. But I
Mhm.
do think there's something to be said for like doing things today that could give you quality of life down the road, but also feel good today because that's important too. You got to live in the moment.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see when Bryan Johnson will pass away. Not that I'm looking forward to it, but just obviously will happen hopefully before I do because he's older than me. It'll be interesting to see like what actually plays out in terms of if he does have like a much longer lifespan than the average human or not.
You said he's 47, right?
Yeah.
This is so sad, but I'm like, I don't actually know that it's guaranteed we'll see him at the end of his life. If he's like already shaved off 5 years, that means
You
he's
think we're
only
gonna
like
die
12
first?
years older. It's only 12 years. I'm like, I don't know.
Oh God.
That's not actually that long.
Especially if I die at 70.
I mean, you could die at an old 88 and he could still be 100. That is not out of this world.
Yeah, but I mean, he's doing so many experimental treatments. I don't know. He might get sick. We'll see.
I mean, if he would learn anything from the people in ancient history,
Exactly.
he probably will
He
die.
needs to listen to this podcast episode, the first half,
Truly.
clearly.
Okay, but I also wonder if that's just immensely stressful.
Like for him, the pressure.
The pressure, but also just the regimen. He's doing so much and thinking about it so much. Like there has to be a level of stress there. Like you're not in flow. You're constantly thinking about it. So is that inadvertently doing something negative?
He says he's not stressed at all. He says compared to when he was obviously stressed at Braintree, it's like totally different. And because he's given up control, like he doesn't use his mind, he just follows a plan that's like written out for him. So he's almost like a robot, I feel like. He just literally does what the plan says. I mean, I'm sure that now that he's got friends and buddies who are doing this with him, right? This, I don't want to say cult, but you know, these people who are bought into his same way of living, I think he feels fulfilled by that. But I do think he's lonely, like other than this relationship with his son, which does seem very healthy, very great for them. He doesn't have a partner and he wants a partner, but it's hard to find someone who can match his lifestyle. So I don't know.
Rough. My personal nightmare. All right. Well, hopefully Bryan Johnson discovers something that can help all of us without having to do all of this. So thank you in advance to him. But yeah, that won't be me.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Our sources are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.